Good morning, everyone. My name's Ian. This is the Coastal Drone Weekly Live, and this is our 23rd episode of 2024, where we're discussing where you can fly as an advanced drone pilot. We're going to go through some questions and answers, some FAQs that we keep getting about advanced operations, what is an advanced operation, where you can fly, and some common scenarios. So, Finn, take it away.
As we mentioned, by the end of today's talk, you will know where you can fly as an advanced pilot. You'll know what regulations apply to advanced pilots, and we're going to answer some FAQs that we get often. So first off, where can you fly as an advanced pilot? So as an advanced pilot, you can fly within 30 meters of a bystander. You can fly near an airport or a heliport. You can fly in controlled airspace, and you can fly over a bystander. Now, you'll notice that there are some stars next to some of these things because it's not just your ability as the advanced pilot to be able to fly in these scenarios. There's another thing that you need to fly in these scenarios, and this is the aircraft needs to have an appropriate safety assurance declaration. Now, you might ask, well, where can I find safety assurance declarations? We've discussed this before, but it is on the Transport Canada portal, Choosing the Right Drone.
The drone itself must be capable of advanced operations, a safety assurance declaration, which is on the Choosing the Right Drone Transport Canada website.
If you're looking at purchasing an aircraft and need it for specific advanced operations, you can head to Choosing the Right Drone, type in the name of the aircraft. Sometimes like the labeling of the aircraft is a little bit funny, so you might need to try a couple different ways of writing the aircraft name, and then it will tell you, can it fly in controlled airspace, can it fly near people. Most of the consumer and enterprise drones that are available on the market right now can at least fly in controlled airspace.
We don't really get into the specifics. We've got an episode, it's like the third or fourth of the year. I think we talked about safety assurance declaration in detail, so go back and check that out. But basically, to be an advanced approved drone to fly in controlled airspace, it's going to need to have a GPS, and it's going to have a minimum accuracy. So you can either buy, modify, or build from scratch your own drone that could be approved for operation in controlled airspace.
The big one that most drones don't have is operations over people. Most quadcopter aircraft out of the box cannot fly directly over people and would need an aftermarket parachute installed on the aircraft in order to fly over people. But again, we've talked about this in our episode on safety assurance declarations. So if you're interested in figuring out the minutia of these, we recommend that you go back and look at that.
Yeah, and this is all specific to our Canadian audience at the moment. But if you're an American and you want to fly with a Part 107 in the States over people, and this is something that's interesting. I was listening to something the other day. Their definition of over people, because it's always been like, well, what's the line? Where's the adjacent? So in Canada, 30 meters and farther away is basic operations. Less than 30 meters from a bystander is an advanced operation, but you have to have a safety assurance declaration for less than 30 meters, but more than 5 meters, or less than 5 meters, which is considered over people. In the States, one of the interpretations I heard was any part of the drone over any part of a human body is considered operations over people. So it's not a distance, is the drone over top of the person.
Yeah, so in Canada, it's different. If the drone was hovering right here, so like when we had the Avata in here, if it's hovering beside my head, it is like by the actual like language definition of over. It's not over me, but legally it is over me, even though it's not.
It's inside your bubble.
It's basically like a cylinder, and this cylinder extends up to space.
Higher than the drone can go.
Yes.
So it's a vertical column of free space around a person. In Canada, in the States, there's two things. There's any part of the drone over any person that's unprotected. And also it's more about hovering, not about transit. So in the States, you can transit over people as long as the drone maintains some sort of horizontal energy, because the theory is that if the props die, it's not going to just immediately go straight down. It's going to continue. But if you were flying horizontally next to someone or above them, and then there's another cluster of people in the flight path the drone is going, then it's potentially going to fly down into them as well. There is one more thing just on the American side as well. There was recently a change, and now you can apply for a waiver for operations over people. We're going to go into detail on that in a totally standalone video. Drones that have prop guards and are under a certain weight, I believe it's 400 grams, but I don't want to be specific like at this point, so we'll come back to that. It has to have prop guards, it has to be under a certain weight, and then you have to apply for a waiver. It's still not an automatic approval. And then it would be, I believe, still falling under Part 107, because Part 107 defines over people operations, which means you couldn't do it recreational with a trust this is what we're going to investigate further. Make sure we have a full video about it, and it'll be completely standalone.
Anyways, for advanced operations in Canada, you as the pilot, you need to be certified for advanced operations, and the drone also needs to be certified for advanced operations via the Safety Assurance Declaration. So some common advanced operations, so, people call me on the phone and they say, well, should I get basic or advanced? What sort of scenarios would I need advanced? And basically anything in a city center, anything in a built-up area. Because for advanced, if you want to fly in controlled airspace or if you want to fly near people, you need to have an advanced. If you're in a built-up area, even if you're doing something like real estate photography, it is not easy to guarantee that you won't fly within 30 meters of someone. Like if you're doing a real estate shoot and the house that you're shooting is backed up to another house, like backyard to backyard, if the person living in that house comes out of their house, you're now illegal. You have to land the drone immediately. It's very, very challenging.
You've got a 30-meter horizontal distance. That's 100 feet. That's in some places like more than the property.
We sometimes do flight reviews here, and there's if the drone does not have a safety assurance declaration, we have an alternate site, and I've gone onto Google Earth and measured a 30-meter distance from, there's a building beside it. I've measured a 30-meter from the door, so I know that if I take off from that spot, then if someone comes out the door, I have not just done an illegal flight review.
Yeah, so it kind of goes into it, like real estate for sure, construction sites. If you have a lot of contractors on site, it's very difficult to brief and allow everyone the opportunity to depart the area because they might be there with a job to do. So if you're doing construction progress photos or video of a construction site or a linear project or something like that, if you have no way of, first off, briefing everyone and making them essential to the operation, then you're going to be dealing with the minimum that your drone can fly. And if you're not an advanced pilot, well, you have to stay away regardless of what the drone can do, right? You could be flying a drone with a parachute, but if you're a basic pilot, you can't fly that drone over top of people.
Or if you're at a construction site, like even if you are able to brief the crew, if you're at a construction site in a city, what if someone walks down the sidewalk?
Yeah, their bystanders are going to be walking up, right? I've done tons of jobs where I'll be standing on the city street intersection in, like, let's say, downtown Surrey. I did a major tower work, and we actually started with the Mavic 3 inside the site where we were able to control it, but then they wanted like pullback exteriors, and it made more sense. At the time, there wasn't a parachute option available for the Mavic 3, and so all we had was, well, we got to go back to micro. And so we switched gears and went to a micro drone operation because we were still operating over city streets and everything else. But it's so difficult to maintain that 16 feet, 5 meters. It's very difficult. Just to reiterate here, because this is one of our top FAQs, is do I need an advanced pilot certificate to fly commercially? No, you do not. You can fly micro commercially. You can fly basic operations commercially. You can fly advanced operations commercially in Canada.
But I have spoken to people and said, well, I think I just need a basic. And I said, okay, you're doing this for work, right? And they say yes. And I say, well, could you ever envision that you'd fly within 30 meters of a person? It's not a very good look for your business. It's that someone calls you and says, hey, can you do this job? No, sorry, it's in controlled airspace. I can't fly it. It's not a very good look for your business.
Yeah, you're basically painting yourself into a corner. And of course, the way around that, stay with micro. But then if you stay with micro, honestly, like micro drones are so good, but they do have a limit. They're not as good in the wind. They're not nearly as good in low light situations. Like a Mavic 3, which is now what, 5 years old? No, 3 years old. 2021, I think, is when it came out. The low light of the Mavic 3 compared to even like the Mini 4 Pro now is still significantly better.
And also, you can't do thermal with a micro. You can't do multispectral with a micro.
So far, yeah.
Yeah, the mapping capabilities aren't as robust with the micro. So if you're looking at a serious commercial operation, we always recommend advanced.
You're buying the right tools for the right job.
Also, it's currently the highest level of certification in Canada. So, and it's prohibitive to obtain the certificate. So,
and this isn't like a plug or a segue or anything like that. Like this is 2025 is when the level 1 complex rules are going to come in place. And if you are already an advanced pilot certificate holder, there is debate about what that means for existing advanced pilots and like what the process will look, because what it'll look like to get your level 1 complex, because there's a mandatory requirement for ground school. One of the efforts is to try and get an existing advanced ground school to qualify for level 1 complex with like a differences course. So if you can take the test without a course right now. There is no mandatory ground school for advanced. I'm not saying you'll guarantee a pass. It's a difficult course or test. But if you've got that in the bag already and got your advanced certificate already, there's going to be some sort of process that will because they did the same thing when the rules changed in 2019, and a lot of existing SFOCs holders were offered, well, do the flight review and we'll pass you through to be an advanced reviewer, because we also needed advanced reviewers back then.
The other one would be high risk SFOC operations, like things like beyond visual line of sight over 25 kilos. On the TC website now, it actually says you need an advanced. They have now actually explicitly written it that you need an advanced certificate in order to apply for high risk SFOCs. So next week we're going to talk about which SFOCs are low risk and which SFOCs are high risk. Just know that you need an advanced certificate. You need an advanced certificate in order to apply for a high-risk SFOC.
You did mention controlled airspace, of course. Like if you're flying near an airport, it's most likely you're going to be in controlled airspace or a control zone right to the ground. So Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Abbotsford, like any major city that has an international airport, pretty much guaranteed, and then a regional airport, also probably guaranteed. Of course, NAV Drone is the tool you're going to use to know whether or not you're in controlled airspace. But another one that NAV Drone won't tell you about is high elevation operations. So for example, Sumas Mountain in Abbotsford is about 2,000 feet above ground. The Class E airspace for the instrument approach that goes into Abbotsford Airport is that inverted layer cake, so that funnel that comes down from high airspace down to intermediate, down to control zones on the ground. There's an extension out there that is 2,200 feet and up, I believe, for Class E. It's a Class E no contact zone, so that means it's not a control zone, but it is controlled airspace, because instrument-rated aircraft like IFR aircraft cannot leave controlled airspace while they're flying. So they have to go through this tunnel or cone. There is a Class E overhead at 2,200 feet. We've talked about this in the past on like our how to read maps videos. Like the only real easy way to know when there's airspace above you is to use either the visual navigation charts, the VNCs, or the VTAs, the terminal area charts. Most drone site survey tools do not show you airspace that is above 400 feet above ground. That airspace is Class E. As a basic pilot, even though you don't need permission from anyone to fly in that airspace in particular, you can't fly as a basic pilot, regardless if your drone has safety assurance declaration. That's one scenario. Cell phone tower inspection is an exact scenario that you would get into doing it up there. You wouldn't be able to fly it. What are the rules inside an advanced environment?
Pretty similar to basic. Get certified, register your aircraft, checklists, site surveys, and then if you are in controlled airspace, you must request permission from NAV Drone.
When required. So again, go back to NAV Drone. NAV Drone's the only tool that currently you can get permission to fly in controlled airspace in Canada. They just did a major update, apparently. We haven't had a chance to really go through it. It'll be another video, I'm sure. But NAV Drone on your phone or on the desktop, right? You want to go through and do your site survey process. We definitely have videos about this. Aircraft registration is the drone management portal, $5 to register your drone. It's got to be on your drone in some sort of easily durable manner, not permanent, but durable. And then do your CARS checklists and site surveys.
How do you get an advanced certificate? You study for the exam. As we mentioned, it's a very challenging exam. What we find is people without an aviation background will most likely need some sort of course.
It's structured in a way, so it's 50 questions and you have 60 minutes, and it's an 80% passing grade. It is an open book exam, so you can use all non-human resources that are available to you, but it is structured in such a way, in the time that's required and the language that the exam is, that it leverages common aviation knowledge, foundational skills before you. So things like knowing what weather theory is and what happens in an advancing cold front, or those are going to be questions that it's not easy to just, you can't Google every answer. No. We find that our average passing grade that we see coming into flight reviews, because that's the second step of this, and we'll get to it in a minute, but the average, like the passing grade is 80%. it's more common than not to see students coming with a passing grade and not really any higher because it's not an easy test.
80%, 81%. I think when I took the advanced exam, I got 83%, and I was a bit annoyed about that.
Well, and you were coming into this as a class 4 instructor.
Almost a class 4 instructor but 1 month before I took that exam, I had completed my CPL flight test.
You came in sort of cold, I think. Yeah. You took our course.
I took our course. I wasn't like making notes in the same way that I was doing.
I took the test when it first came out, the day it went live, completely cold. And I passed. My aviation knowledge was very strong, of course, doing that commercially. So, and because it's an open book exam, I was able to leverage that. But there was a lot of drone specific questions that the course would have helped for sure. It's very easy to go downhill. Like your confidence will fall apart if you start seeing more and more questions like, I don't know anything about this. So that's the whole point of these courses and every other course that's out there for drones is to give you the confidence going into the test that you can do it. So once you've done the exam, you'll be granted a basic certificate and then you can fly as a basic drone pilot. So more than 30 meters away from people in Class G or Class F advisory as long as it's uncontrolled airspace.
This will allow you to practice for the flight review. Exactly. Get some time on the sticks.
Yeah, we get that. That's a pretty common FAQ for us is like, well, this is like a chicken and egg question. Should I do my basic first? No, you don't need to do your basic online exam first. Just study and pass the advanced online exam, register your drone, get your checklists and SOPs in place and start flying, right? That's where you can focus your efforts. Once you've done that, then you can upgrade to advanced by completing the flight review.
After successfully completing the flight review, you'll get your advanced certificate.
There is a $25 processing fee that you'll get billed after the fact before you're allowed to download your flight review.
That's paid directly to transport.
So like total fee costs to get your drone pilot certificate, $5 to register your drone, $10 to do the test, assuming you pass it once. You pay your flight reviewer. That's a separate fee to the flight reviewer or to Coastal in this case, like we have our $250 flight review, which includes that prep course. This is assuming you've passed the advanced already. The $25 again goes to transport after the fact to it. So you, in theory, could get your advanced for as little as $290, plus tax, right? So it's on par with what it costs to get your Part 107 in the States. If you are an American or any other foreign citizen wanting to fly under advanced in Canada, the process is essentially the same. You still do the online test, you still do the in-person flight review, but in order to do the in-person flight review, you have to have a foreign pilot SFOC in place first because you cannot register a drone in Canada as a foreign citizen. And there was some confusion over the past couple of years about, well, what about just renting a drone or borrowing? You must have the SFOC number. Even though the drone management portal doesn't ask for it, the drone has to be the pilot in command of the drone for the flight review has to have an SFOC number in place before they can complete the review. So that's just the only extra hurdle that you have to do.
And we're going to talk about this more next week. They have clarified some of the foreign pilot SFOC application process, and it used to be you needed to provide like more information than what was expected of a Canadian citizen. But now they've really cut it down. They really pared it down. If you want to get an advanced, you basically need to provide all the same documentation that you would provide when you're going to the flight review.
So you're in an advanced environment, and we're still talking about the rules. So checklist requirements.
It's the same for basic or advanced pilots. The checklist requirements, 90123, 90127.
We do have two different versions of the SOP course with our basic and advanced, and that's more because our advanced, we're going to spend more time talking about advanced operations site survey process. Whereas if you're just a basic person, you're going to be concerned less with NAV Drone on the permission side, but at least on the site survey side. So we're going to streamline that a bit more.
Questions that we get frequently about advanced environments. So a question that I get all the time, what is on the flight review? What does the flight review consist of? I will not spoil my whole review today, but I will tell you it is 3 parts. There is a document review, like a flight planning section, and then the flight section. In the document review, whoever your reviewer is will look at your documentation. You need to have certain documents to be eligible for the flight review. Your ID, basic certificate, advanced, drone registration, and then your checklists. You need to have all of these in place to be eligible for the flight review. Next is the flight planning portion. If you read the guide, you as the candidate need to be able to describe the site survey process. Your reviewer will ask you about the site survey process. What sort of things are you looking for? How to request permission? These types of questions. There might be questions about regulations that are related to flight planning as well, like specific regulations related to flight planning. And then there's the flight portion. People ask me, are there advanced maneuvers on the flight portion? There are no advanced maneuvers on the flight portion.
No flaming hoops.
No flaming hoops. If you're able to maintain positive control of the aircraft and interpret a verbal instruction from your reviewer and perform that instruction, then you will be successful on the flight review portion of the review. You can kind of think about it like this. In the flight planning portion, you're planning the flight. And then in the flight portion, you're executing the flight. You plan and execute a flight with your reviewer.
It's standardized, by the way. All of our flight reviewers use the same script and the same standard. So no matter where you go across Canada, it should be there's some variability, of course. TP 15395 is a public document that lays out the expectations of a flight review and spells out the format of the flight review, and that's what we follow.
Yes. We ask you to bring in 2 site surveys, 1 site survey in an advanced environment, just so we can see if you can plan in an advanced environment. And then 1 for where you're actually flying on the day. Very simple. The actual location could be in controlled or uncontrolled airspace, doesn't matter. The 1 for the actual location, if you need time on the review to, like if you've never been to the site before and want to just do a couple last minute checks, your reviewer will give you some time if you need to take 10 minutes to complete your site survey. No problem. That is the content of the flight review.
It's incredibly rare to hear someone failing on the flight portion of a flight review. I think we've both experienced it once or twice out of hundreds.
Mm-hmm. I always tell this to my students who are about to take a flight test. If there is a surprise on the flight test, it is your fault because you did not read the guide. We encourage it, and it's in our prep course. You should go read the guide.
There shouldn't be any surprises.
No surprises.
Yeah. Another one that we get a lot is, do I need an advanced certificate for an SFOC in general?
Low risk, no. High risk, yes.
And that's something that we've always said is like, yeah, it's a good idea, but now it's actually in black and white.
Now they've been more. There's more clarity around that.
Do I need an SFOC for over people or controlled airspace?
No, this is a common misconception that people have. I have spoken to people before, and they've said, "Oh, and I'm getting my advance because I need an SFOC." And I say, oh, because I'm generally interested, like what people need SFOCs for, because it's pretty rare. And then they say, oh, no, I was speaking to one person, and they said, oh, I'm just going to be flying over people. That's not a scenario that is SFOC. That's a scenario based on your aircraft safety assurance declaration.
And having the advanced certificate. So controlled airspace over people, near people, that is advanced certificate plus safety assurance declaration. And part of the reason that this keeps coming up, and so it's not for a lack of education, it's probably someone read it somewhere, because prior to 2019, you did need to have an SFOC for built up areas, commercial operations, right? And that was a pretty broad thing. Yeah, so these days, there's a very specific list of what you need an SFOC for. A CARS 901, which is normal, basic, and advanced operations, is very expansive, so go there first. Or take our course. Is there anywhere I can't fly even with an advanced?
Yes. So this is the places where no aircraft in Canada can fly without permission, and that is Class F restricted airspace.
Yeah. And where would you find that?
In the world, you would find Class F restricted airspace around prisons, military facilities, emergencies, wildfires. You would find information about that in aeronautical charts, the CFS, the Designated Airspace Handbook, and then NAV Drone as well. NAV Drone will have all the information. Basically, if you switch it, or actually basic, advanced, or micro filter, it'll show up in red as a Class F, a CYR.
And then the other one that you did mention was Collaborative Flight Planning Services. So all NOTAMs or Notice to Airmen are listed in the Collaborative Flight Planning Service. So you would punch in the nearest airport to where you are, and it would open the NOTAM file, give you a list that's very difficult to read of all of them. But we have a Weather and NOTAMs full video 3-4 weeks ago. It's on our YouTube. Definitely want to check that one out.
Shared by NAV Canada.
Am I guaranteed to obtain controlled airspace permission?
No. Controllers have discretion over their own airspace. I've spoken to some of the controllers in our local airport and asked them, like, so when someone makes a controlled airspace permission request, what's the process? And they say, oh, it goes to the kind of the highest rank controller at the tower. It's different for every tower. This tower's process is they call the operator and ask them. And one of the things that he said is a lot of people always request maximum altitude even if they don't need it. So you're not guaranteed controlled airspace permission. Just the same as we are. Like when you're in controlled airspace, you request a certain altitude, you request a certain routing, and they give it to you or they don't. They're not looking to prevent drone pilots from flying, but their air traffic controllers, their primary thought is the safety of the flight that's happening in their zone.
Yeah, because it's see and avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's their responsibility to make sure that there's no conflict between aircraft. Ultimately, it is actually up to the pilot in command's discretion for the safety of the flight.
So basically, to sum it up, on that one, it's don't ask for more than you need, right? And the reality is for most real estate, we've talked about this like way early in this year, we talked about it in real estate photography. You're probably not going to be flying much above the roof line of the house anyway, because the perspective of the photo, like unless you're specifically going to a top-down scenario, you don't need more than like 20, 30 feet above the building. Because the point is the building that you're trying to sell needs to be in the shot. The other side of that is you can ask for more, but again, if you're asking for more, have a good reason for it. So we got a great question here from Daryl. Can you speak to BC drone restriction in controlled recreation areas, ski areas, as these places are not listed in the drone site selection tool? So for example, drones and other RPAS, Panorama Mountain Resort does not permit the use of drones or RPAS. This is now private property within its controlled recreation area, which tenure. Canadian aviation regulation states it's illegal to pilot an RPAS within 1.9 kilometers of any heliport. That's kind of true, but not right, first off. So 1.9 kilometers is 1 nautical mile. So they're talking about a heliport, so it's a certified heliport. You have to have an advanced pilot certificate to fly within 1 nautical mile of a heliport.
When we're talking about permission, there is 2 layers of permission. There's an airspace consideration and a ground consideration. Airspace permission, that is at the jurisdiction of NAV Canada. NAV Canada says, even if we can give you permission, if someone has asked you not to fly a drone, it is best to respect that. So things like park bylaws for cities or someone's private property, if they really don't want you flying over it, they technically don't actually have jurisdiction over that airspace. NAV Canada recommends that you respect that.
Oh, be a good citizen, good Samaritan. Like unless you have a reason to, right?
Second part is ground permission. You cannot trespass for the purposes of taking off or landing. When you're talking about something like a resort, if you are taking off or landing from their property, they can legally trespass you from that property because you're now doing a non-approved activity on private property. You cannot trespass for the purposes of taking off or landing. If you're doing a real estate shoot and hop the fence to take off from the next person's yard to get a better shot, is not.
Yeah, you're trespassing.
You're trespassing.
The rest of it is I assume, Daryl, this is a copy paste from Panorama's website because basically they're saying you're responsible to fly aircraft safely and legally. You must follow the rules set in the cars and the criminal code. Cars are enforced by Transport Canada. So this is the resort saying, don't fly drones at our resort. We don't want you flying drones at our resort. We don't want the liability of you flying drones at our resort, because if they say you can, now they're assuming that liability because they're endorsing it. And you're right, like you're saying here, most ski areas have these prohibitions. Yeah, most ski resorts don't want you flying drones at their ski resort because we've all seen the videos of like someone flying a Phantom down the hill and it's nailing a skier or something like that.
Or hitting one of the towers on the chairlift or anything. There are some areas at Whistler that are CYR.
If you're flying a micro drone, this is going to be the same, right? Micro or whatever, because right now we're talking about permission of the ground, right? So you're on technically private property when you're at a tenure at a resort. If you're inside the resort boundaries, you're on private property. You need permission from the landholder to fly a drone from there. It is a thing because like you've got drones now that have autonomous flying, like Skydio. Pretty much every DJI now has got like Active Track 4.0 or better, I think it is, that like it does a really good job of following people, and especially in a ski environment because it's high contrast. You can't do that because you're now within 30 meters of bystanders if it's bigger than a Mini. So like the Air 3, etc. It's not a good idea to do it because you're in a public environment with no control over bystanders. No, you're not flying the drone if you have it chasing you, for one thing. So how do you deal with a flyaway? Like if the drone's chasing you down the hill and it loses signal, it's probably going back up the hill for one thing.
And if you're the one skiing, you don't have your hands on the controls anymore. Yeah. And part of the regulations say that you actually have to be able to take control of the aircraft at any time.
Yeah, like how you're going to drop your gloves and everything else. So
the question that extends from this is, could I take one step outside of the park boundary, take off the drone, and then fly, request airspace permission, and then fly in? As we read the regulations, legally yes, but don't do it. It's not a good idea. It's not worth the fight. And if they're gonna say, because they could say, oh well, anybody flies even if they fly it legally, anybody flies a drone in our resort, you're kicked out of the resort. They can do that.
Yeah, that's their right.
That's their right. It's their resort.
It comes back to, are you being a good steward for the hobby, for the industry? Right? There's so many political issues going on with drones right now. These kind of things fuel that fire and cause problems for the industry. And yeah, when I say industry, I mean hobby and commercial activities. This buying and selling of drones, using of drones, all this is an industry, the manufacture of it, the consumption of it. On Facebook the other day, someone was asking about, do I need an SFOC for this advertised event? And what they wanted to do is actually fly outside the advertised event. And Transport has said that if you're more than 30 meters away from the boundaries of the event, it is no longer considered flying over the advertised event. So in that situation, let's say it's a county fair or something like that. If you take off and maintain that minimum 30-meter distance or 100-foot distance from the boundaries of the event, then you are just flying outside of an SFOC requirement. But, and this is where I kind of came back, is like, a couple things always seem to happen at advertised events. First off, there's tons of bystanders. People are going to be milling in and out, especially if you've got think of the IPE or something like that. The people are going to be wandering around. So you're going to have you're not going to be able to control your bystanders. So you need to have an advance. You need to have the near people, possibly over people, regardless of whether you go over the event or not. Like I used to live in the Okanagan and go to the Armstrong IPE. Every year, there was helicopter rides at the IPE. So now there's a helicopter taking off and landing constantly at the event, low-flying aircraft. That is risky, right? And the other side of it is I've been at other events in the Okanagan where suddenly, out of nowhere, someone in like a Piper Cub would show up at like 200 feet. They came in at 100 knots. You had no idea they're there. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's an airplane flying through the area and they do like a wing over to show off or something. And everyone thinks it's great, except for the fact that like there's the drone pilot like sweating bullets because they didn't realize that there was a plane coming in. That's probably the biggest hazard. You are more likely to run into another drone than you are to run into another aircraft at an advertised event. Matt from Blackhawk Aeronautical, we have him on every once in a while. He does a ton of advertised event SFOC live production stuff. He did the FIS Ski Cup. He's doing basketball, indoor, outdoors, everything. Like he was at Edmonton for the playoffs. He constantly has to deal with rogue drones showing up to the point where it is a problem, because not only is it a problem to you as a hit hazard, but when you're live broadcasting, if it jams your channel and gets on your video feed, now you've got this massive audience that's suddenly seeing someone else's entirely different drone, like potentially flooding your feed. Jim asked in the chat, does NAV Drone self-update? Yeah, if you have, depending on your device, you can have automatic updates turned on. It's always a good idea to go into the App Store if you're on iOS to just double check if you've got the latest version.
You can do the same thing on Google if you go to the Google Play Store on Android. And then the web client will keep itself up to date always.
Because it's a totally self-dependent web app at that point.
As we've mentioned before, any flight planning you're doing, we recommend using the web app. It's just easier to use the web app than it is to use your phone.
You can use either the map.nav drone or you can use the full portal for just doing planning.
Yeah. If you need to request permission, you need to use the portal. But just to check airspace, map.nav drone. I don't like to give away flight review credit. But, I'll ask this, like, how do you request permission? There's only one place to request airspace permission. Don't call the tower. So how do you request permission? The only official source is NAV Drone. There is no other official application besides NAV Drone.
Don't make radio calls unless instructed to by ATC, and if you hold an ROCA and a ground station license as well.
Yes.
It would be great to hear in comments after the fact if you have other scenarios that we've missed. Definitely put them in the comments of the video. Like, it's a blanket kind of all-encompassing for these scenarios, but the reality of it is, if you're going to be near people, that could be anywhere. If you're finding this content useful, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you didn't like it, hit the did not like button so that we know. We really appreciate your feedback either way. Also in the comments, like I said, let us know about other advanced operations scenarios that you run into on a regular basis or something that we missed. Thanks again for watching these, and we'll see you next week. Bye.